Hello everyone, Ivan here. Welcome to the first video in my Basics to LD series, my LD bootcamp, whatever I end up naming it. In this series, we're going to be going over a few key things that are instrumental to learning how to do LD at a competitive level. So if you are interested in going to tournaments, learning how to debate correctly with the styles and tricks that everyone uses, then this is the video series for you. LD, if you're not aware, is the 1v1 competitive format for debate. And if it's something you're not interested in, that's fine. If you're doing things like extemp, public forum, Congress, World Schools, I guess too, any of those debate events also carry over a lot of the basic skills. So learning a bit about LD can pretty much in most cases, there's some skills you can just Control-C, Control-V into your other events and get better at those too. With all that stuff out of the way, let's get into our first video, which is going to be talking about the very basics of LD. What do you need to know about it before you begin competing? The first thing we should cover is what is LD. LD stands for Lincoln Douglas, and it's a style of 1 versus 1 debate. In the original Lincoln Douglas debates that were conducted between, you can guess, Lincoln and Douglas, they debated a series of resolutions, usually about slavery, but they also discussed other subjects as well. Basically, they were a form of debate in which one side would become the affirmative, meaning they'd be for the resolution. The other side would be the opposition, the negative, as it's called. They would be against the resolution. And at that time period, the two debaters would have their sides and the resolutions ahead of time, and then they would debate on them. RLD is a little bit different nowadays. We have one resolution for a 2-month cycle, and on that resolution, that topic, you have to prepare to be both the affirmative and the negative, and when you actually get to your round, to your tournament, to your scrimmage, to wherever you're competing, you will find out at that point which side you will be taking for that round, and it'll alternate every now and then. So basically the topics are pretty open-ended, and you're expected to learn both sides of it. The LD round has a very concrete structure that doesn't change in between rounds. Your round will always start with a 6-minute affirmative construction, then it's followed by a 3-minute negative questioning period, which is unique in that the person who's debating for the neg will be asking questions to the affirmative, but the affirmative will not be asking questions back to the negative. After that period, the negation will give their 7-minute construction, the AF will question the neg for 3 minutes, and then they go into a series of rebuttals to finish the round. Specifically, I know the term construction is not something you're usually used to in other forms of mediums or, just outside of debate. So let's dive deeper into that word before finishing off today's lesson. The idea of a construction is something that it's a constructed speech, meaning you built it before you got into the round. That means that this speech would have all of your basic arguments. It would have all the vast majority of your data. Pretty much everything in your construction will be supported by data. It's the thing that you researched for a couple weeks, hopefully not a couple hours before the tournament, and you should know this should be a pretty good case with your arguments. Of course, no argument is bulletproof. An additional thing that's very unique to LD is that it is philosophical, which means that we aren't just covering what could happen or what will happen. We're also talking about philosophically whether an action should happen. Philosophy is used very often in our day-to-day lives. For example, if we talk about gun control, there's no need to own a gun. It's a philosophical right. The idea that some people should have certain privileges and rights that are intrinsic to them is inherently philosophical, but obviously we should still be debating on it, right? So if you want to, when we're debating gun control, we're debating how heavy this right should extend into our day-to-day lives, and whether or not it should be a right, whether or not you should have it extend to your day-to-day life, whether or not it's even valid to constrict it at all. All of that is a philosophical debate, even though you're not using Descartes to support it, except for an LD, where you can use Descartes to support it. Just kidding. You don't actually have to know many philosophers to do well in LD. That's a very common misconception. You'll be fine if you just know concepts. If you can say, well, I believe blank should happen because here's my reasoning. You don't have to say, oh, well, Nietzsche had this reasoning and is correct because of that. At the higher level, it's something that you certainly can do, but don't think of it as a mandatory. Either way, though, let's talk about how we channel philosophy into our constructions. We do this through two things, a value and a criterion. Neither of these are something you use in day-to-day life, but they make perfect sense in a debate round. A value is what you think is the most important thing. It's kind of the lens via which you want to evaluate a topic. So if our topic, or I guess we'll make an example later. The criterion is how you reach your value. So for example, if your value is life, it's, well, how do we measure life? Well, I measure life as happiness. When you're happy, that means your life is doing good. When you're in pain or you're not happy, that means your life is doing bad. So via this lens, we can figure out how to get happiness, and via the lens of happiness, we can realize whether our resolution is good or bad. These are pretty much mandatory in every LD round. However, at the lower level, at the novice level, at your entry level tournaments, they're usually not debated too heavily. You usually just agree that one of the things is good. Most likely it's going to be life or well-being or quality of life or any other synonym for saying that if my position saves more lives than my opponent's, it's the better position. At the higher levels, you start getting uniquer arguments where you're saying that, oh, justice is important. So it's not always about what preserves the most lives. It's about what preserves the most morality, things like that, most justice, things like that. At the lower level, don't worry too much about that. Awesome. Now, let's get some fun going. I like to make little drills and stuff. So we'll have a drill after this lesson. But before that, let's go through and get an example as to how an LD construction could look like before getting into some rebuttals to that case. So let's say my topic was resolved, children should go to bed at midnight. Awesome. I don't know whether or not you support that. Personally, I don't really support that, but as an LD debater, I have to learn how to do both sides of the argument. So let's see what our affirmative, the person arguing for this resolution, would say. And as a reminder, this means that they're arguing that kids should be going to bed at midnight. So for my value, I would probably say I value happiness, because I'll say, well, happiness is super instrumental to kids. The whole point of childhood is joy and bliss and ignorant happiness. So happiness is what we should be prioritizing in this resolution. Then, how do we reach happiness? What's going to be our criterion? Well, I'll say cartoons make kids happy. So whichever side of the debate gets to maximize the number of cartoons is going to win, and because it creates the most happiness. If you notice, what I did here is I've very narrowed the resolution from just kids should go to bed at midnight could go in infinite number of directions. There's a million arguments you could make there talking about everything. But when I narrow it to just say kids should watch the most number of cartoons, does making kids go to bed at midnight let kids watch more or less cartoons? The debate gets much more narrow, which makes it much easier for me to make two strong arguments that feel difficult to counter without first countering the assumption that we should be evaluating via cartoons and happiness. To support my side of the argument, that going to bed at midnight will allow kids to watch more cartoons, make them more happy, and thus it's a good thing, I have two contentions. My first contention is that all of the good cartoons are shown at night. Then I would probably give a couple examples. Obviously, this is just for fun, so we don't have any. And then I'd say, well, letting kids go to bed at midnight means that kids get to experience more of the cartoons. They have more time to watch cartoons. Therefore, we're increasing the number of cartoons kids watch and increasing their happiness. For my second contention, I would say that when kids go to bed at midnight, they miss school the next day, which is a good thing because when kids don't go to school, they instead get to watch more cartoons, which makes them happier, which means that it's good for kids to go to bed at midnight. This is also an example of how having a narrow value and criterion can let you spin some things that would otherwise be seen as a negative into a positive, right? Because naturally you would assume that kids not going to school is a bad thing. But in LD, because we can evaluate based on cartoons and happiness, kids not going to school is a moral good. And it's a reason you should vote for the resolution and for my argument, which is properly constrained. But luckily, LD is not all about whether or not you just make a very cool speech in your first speech, have a great essay. It's all about rebuttals. When you're rebutting, you have a few different options, and in fact, in LD, you should be using all of them. You can attack your opponent's value, their criterion, and their contentions. Usually, you will do all three. At the novice level, you will probably agree to their value and criterion, and then you will attack their contentions. But for the sake of good examples, we'll attack all three. So as the negation, saying that kids should not be staying up to midnight, we would first have an issue with the value, right? Of saying happiness is all that matters. Because naturally in our day-to-day lives, that's not how we go about our lives, right? We don't just say, oh, blank makes me happy, therefore I'll give up everything else for the momentary happiness. No, we care about other things, like we go to a job to get money instead of going to Universal, right? We don't just care about happiness. So first, I would like, as an egg, I would give you a different value. I would say we care instead about knowledge or about kids' futures, right? And I'd give you a reason why that matters. And in that case, we would say, well, we no longer have to care about going to bed at midnight to increase the number of cartoons, because cartoons don't give you more knowledge or give you a better future. Instead, blah, 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 blah. Don't let kids go to school, right? That's how we would attack a value. We would kind of reframe the debate and try to shove away from the framing that makes my opponent's arguments look good and towards one that would make my arguments look good. Then for the criterion, we could say, well, we do care about happiness, but the way we make kids happy is by giving them a good, secure future, right? We could argue with the idea that cartoons increase happiness and instead argue that going to school, becoming a doctor, becoming a lawyer, becoming a politician, becoming a scientist, becoming a teacher, that any of those outcomes instead cause more happiness compared to just watching cartoons. That's the way we would attack the criterion. As you notice, the difference between attacking the value and criterion is that when you're attacking the criterion, you're trying to link a different criterion to the value. Basically saying, here's another way to achieve happiness and why my way is better than my opponent's, instead of saying, don't achieve happiness, achieve blah, 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 blah. And then for some arguments against the contentions, we could kind of spin it the other way, where if they say, well, kids like don't need to stay up all night to watch cartoons because instead you can just watch those cartoons in the morning. Basically, we're just getting rid of my opponent's argument. We're saying it doesn't really matter whether you watch cartoons at nighttime or in the morning, because nowadays we don't like watch them on the TV when they're scheduled broadcasting. No, we just download them, watch them on Disney Plus, Netflix, wherever. You can watch them at any point. Judge, it's a non-argument. It's a non-issue. It's no reason to vote. And then for the second contention, we would say, well, actually, when you go to school, sometimes your teacher will show you cartoons at school. So as you'll see, blah, 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 kids just see cartoons at school anyway. So again, staying home to watch cartoons isn't better than just going to school and watching cartoons there. And then you could argue that maybe teachers have access to some cartoons that kids don't usually, right? Because a teacher might, I don't know, have a subscription to a certain service that the kids' parents don't, or blah, 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 blah. Some reason that why going to school helps you with watching your cartoons. So to summarize this rebuttal, basically we've attacked all three aspects. First, we've attacked the value, and we've told you how like happiness isn't the best thing to evaluate off of. Then we attacked the criterion and told you that even if you wanted to evaluate via happiness, you would do it via kids' futures instead of their cartoon watching. And even if you ignored both of those arguments, you would find that the affirmative's contentions simply don't stack up because both of them are very easily disposed of. And then you would go into your negation construction, which is just the exact thing we did from the AF side, but as the neg, where you'll give your own value criterion and your own two contentions, or three contentions. With all that out of the way, we have finished our basic understanding of what LD is, what it means to have a construction, have rebuttals, what it means to have a value criterion, how philosophy introduces into LD, and like why you don't have to worry about it too heavily. I hope you all enjoyed this basic summary. I'll leave you with one exit ticket, a homework assignment, if you will. If you can do it in the comments, you can do it on paper. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. I'm not in charge. Let's try to make your own construction. Basically, just give me the two arguments, the value and criterion you use. If I gave you the resolution that every family should own a dog, that's going to be resolved. Every family should own a dog. Do this on the affirmative or the negation, however you want. Give me a framing device with a value criterion, and give me your two contentions. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this introduction very well. Join me next time where we'll talk more about either rebuttals or framework or questioning or flowing, or how to make cases, speeches, cards. I'm not quite sure what the order is going to be quite yet, but the next video will be coming soon. I hope you all enjoyed. Peace.